I'm now joined by Matsobane Nkoko, the IEC's party funding manager. A very good afternoon to you, Matsobane. Thanks very much for your time. Of course, I mean, all these donations we are seeing here that you have disclosed there is still no disclosure threshold for political parties, but also for non-aligned political candidates.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to viewers of Newzroom Afrika. Vuyo, we, as a matter of fact, currently have the disclosure threshold, thanks to the Western Cape High Court decision that was taken only a couple of days ago on the 16th of August, as a matter of fact. There was a matter that was brought before this court by what do you call it, an NPC, a non-profit organization called
My Vote Counts.
Yes. So the judge then the court took the decision that the thresholds that were then existent, should still be existent until such time that Parliament takes a new decision on the thresholds. So as a matter of fact, towards the later part of the month, we were confirmed that the thresholds stand.
Okay. So they are still in terms of the previous dispensation before the law was revised by Parliament, which of course created a lot of furore at the time. Interesting amounts, of course, given what we have grown to be accustomed to, because I mean you may recall that when these amounts were disclosed initially, people were finding it very difficult to believe them.
Very true, Vuyo. In the first place, I think you started well by indicating that the thresholds were, it was doubtful whether these thresholds existed for a while until the court decided. The thresholds, we knew for a fact that they were repealed. However, I think to the credit of political parties, they came forward regardless of the thresholds being repealed. As a matter of fact, as early as the start of the month in August, political parties, or in July rather, political parties were submitting their disclosures, to indicate that they received so many, donations. And you can imagine that we just come from an election season where the fundraising machinery of political parties was absolutely at on high drive. You can see even by the amount that has been declared of almost 200 million rand, never seen before.
Of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that your DA, IFP, Rise Mzansi, are the richest. It just talks about monies they received in the last while.
Absolutely. It just shows that those with deeper pockets seem to have some affinity to these political parties. Either that, or the fundraising machinery of these political parties was really on a high drive. I just need to qualify that, though, that if you look at these three particular political parties, Democratic Alliance, the IFP, and Rise Mzansi, there is a lot of commonality in terms of who has donated to this particular party. I think the Oppenheimer family being a common trend there, and to a very large extent Martin Moshal also showing, with Action SA, who has really been behind Action SA for a very long time. I think quarter in, quarter out, the name of Martin Moshal will show on the disclosure thresholds, particularly with regards to, the so-called new parties, smaller in terms of representation in the legislatures. Your Action SA, your Build One SA, certainly getting a lot of support from Martin Moshal.
Of course, I mean, we must also, I think in the context to complete the conversation, that other parties do get money from the fiscus, and the ANC does get the biggest chunk of that.
Correct. In fact, not just the ANC, your Democratic Alliance,
Yes.
now BOSA itself, Build One SA, is receiving money from the fiscus because remember, this is the first report after the May election. Correct. So majority of these parties that we are talking about here and have received quite a substantial donation are now represented in the various legislatures, be it national or provincial. So you can see that raising money and campaigning has worked for them because now they are in the legislatures.
Just looking at what has happened in this instance, say Parliament then goes ahead and sort of looks at this issue again, and then there are all these upper limits and the disclosure threshold and all those issues are properly addressed. Do you foresee a difference given this particular experience when you compare it, of course, with what happened before the May 29 elections? Do you think sorting out the legislative issues and coming up with limits would change the situation either way?
Buyo, I think the main question to ask is, where would those limits be? We know that for many of the political parties, they are arguing that the 100,000 minimum threshold is way too low. They would like that to be increased to figures, indeterminate, but certainly much larger figures, maybe 500,000 or something like that. What does that mean? It means that anyone that, and I'm using the 500,000 just as an example, not in any way, what has been proposed. If it were to be the case, then anyone that donates anything up to 500,000 would not have to disclose their donation, or the party would not have disclosed that donation that they received. But on the other side, parties are saying 15 million rand cap is way too low, given the cost of running political parties, running campaigns, and so forth. So such amount could increase to figures, into tens of millions, as a matter of fact. Now, with that, if that were to happen, you can imagine that individuals that have demonstrated here to have deeper pockets, they will definitely be able to give more than the 15 million rand that we are seeing here. And, certainly we will know less and less about those that donate below the new threshold and so forth. But I'm believing that, these ones that have demonstrated the ability, like, entities like your Fynbos Equitate that have given a maximum 15 million rand, your trusts like the Batho Trust that has given 15 million rand to the ANC. You can imagine that for this financial year, they are done. They don't have room to donate. But if the thresholds were to be increased, or the upper limits were to be increased, then we can see them coming back perhaps to donate, the difference of whatever the new limit is going to be.
Is it fair to say elections have a huge, another proximity to elections is a big influence in these numbers, but also the disclosure thereof?
Certainly. I think the data that we have over the last 3 years, you'll remember that in the first year we had local government elections. That was only a couple of months after this legislation was implemented. We've seen the numbers looking quite substantial compared to the year after, which was the year 2022. Now we come into the year 2024, very close to election. You'll notice that the fourth quarter happened just before the elections were held, the fourth quarter of 23-24 financial year. Now, it happened just before elections were held, and we're sitting at about 172 million. Once again, at the time, 172 million was the highest amount of donation declared. Now we see that very close to election, round about May, there was further more donations that reached the 190, almost 200 million donations. So there is definitely a positive correlation. Elections are a major influence towards the donors. In fact, those with, serious interest in politics and they've got the resources were not shy this time around. If you look at the numbers that we are presenting to you, they were not shy to put money where their mouths are, as it were.
The biggest surprise for you when you first looked at the numbers altogether? Did anything jump up?
Certainly the bottom line, the figure of 190 million, almost 200 million, it's one thing that jumped out. But when you begin to peel the onion, then you begin to see that there is so much connection between those that donate. People that own multiple companies will make use of all those companies to donate the maximum amount to the particular party or parties that they have affinity towards. So those two things were for us very, very telling, as a matter of fact. I think they are quite interesting, if you undertake a further analysis into exactly what this means.
I would imagine that, you would be fairly familiar with trends continent-wide or internationally. Is our picture any different from what happens or often happens elsewhere in the world?
I'll tell you what, on the African continent view, South Africa has a peculiar method of donations. In many African countries, party income is only from the state. And further to that, where they are receiving donations, there is a particular limit in terms of how much political parties can spend. Ours is income-based, theirs is largely expenditure-based. So if it's said that parties can only spend 100 million, for example, there is therefore no point to raise money beyond 100 million for a particular party. Now, we look obviously at the United States of America currently as they are working towards their elections, their presidential elections. We know that the presidential hopeful Kamala Harris has raised quite a lot of money in a very short space of time. It does tell you that politics and money are inseparable.
Matsobane Nkoko, thank you very much for your time and insights. He is the IEC's party funding manager, following, of course, the disclosure of how much political parties have gotten from a whole range of donors in the past few months.